Okay, so let's get started. Let's just dive in because 2.5 minutes in, we need to get moving here because this is going to take a while. The team I wanted to start with is the one that is actually competitive right now, not just having young players and having a lot of really interesting young pieces, but those young pieces are the ones that are actually like carrying the load for them. And it's the Memphis Grizzlies, right? This is, for a lot of people around the league, one of the model organizations right now in terms of rebuilding through the draft. And look, I'm sure that even they would tell you, like, the reason that they are so able to rebuild on the fly in the way that they have is because they nailed the Ja Morant pick, right? Nailing that top end draft pick where you get an all NBA guy by the time year 2, year 3 rolls around, it makes rebuilding so much easier. But even beyond that, they are a model organization for nailing draft picks, thinking a little bit outside the box, which we'll talk about whenever we get to the picks that they made this year in the draft. But just a really, really good, smart front office that thinks about things a little bit differently and has been extremely successful so far. I don't know if they've nailed every single move they've made, but you don't have to whenever you hit the big ones. And then you also like hit home runs on a couple of the moves on the margins, like they have with the trade up to get Desmond Bain at number 30, and him turning into a guy that I think like even has more upside than what we've seen so far.
I think of the word synergy when I think of the Memphis Grizzlies, just from top to bottom, their organization. If they're going to be the model for a rebuild over the last several years, it's not just because they've nailed high-end talent. It's because they identify sleepers. They find guys that they can develop and really add something to with their skill development program, where guys take a leap from year 1 in the league to years 2 and 3 and even beyond. And they just, the way that they draft, the way that they identify talent, it all supports the style of play that their organization really wants to go with, that Taylor Jenkins has had here with a 5-out offense with some aggressive defensive stuff and length on the front line to be able to have a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr., who's that linchpin defensively and is so impactful, to Ja Morant on offense and realizing what does he need to be successful, surrounding him with good role-playing shooters, slashers, defenders, guys who know their role, like top to bottom. Every piece fits so well together. That's why the Grizzlies have turned this around so quickly, but they've got really good players. And it's, to me, those are the guys that deserve a lot of the credit, right? We can talk about the organization and how strong of a job they've done top to bottom, but it's the players that are ones that are out there really doing the work and putting that in. And that's where I'm excited to dive into the Grizzlies here today.
Yeah. And, you know, we should also define what we're talking about here in terms of like, you know, young players, et cetera, how we're bringing them in and how this can be a bit funky because the Grizzlies are kind of a prime example of this, right? It's mostly rookie scale guys, right? Like that's what we're talking about here, is guys on rookie scale deals that have been drafted within the last 4 draft classes is kind of the way you're thinking about this, right?
Right.
That's where it gets a bit funky because like Jaren Jackson is a year, or not a year, I think he's like a couple of months younger than Ja Morant, but theoretically doesn't really qualify for this because he was drafted so young and, you know, is now matriculated through his rookie scale deal at this point. But that doesn't make him like not a piece of the young core either. You know, definitionally, these things can get funky and finicky. And I deal with this when I do the rookie scale rankings. When I do them, I'm trying to like even decide on how to do them, how I want to like go about defining rookie scale, you know, players, if it's worth continuing to do them. Do I just do them on the podcast? I don't know. We'll talk about it at a later date. But nonetheless, I think that it's worth kind of defining that definitionally in terms of how finicky this can be, because the Grizzlies do have an incredible young core, even without Jaren Jackson. I mean, Ja Morant is an all NBA player at this point. Desmond Bain is absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, I forget, did Desmond average like 18 points a game last year? And is obviously one of the best 3-point shooters in the league. I think as he continues to get even more confident and plays off the bounce a little bit more, we're going to see more growth from him. Like it's just one of those things where he's so good at fitting into a scheme that we saw it more last year in the moments where Ja Morant was out, and we saw it a little bit more in the moments where Jaren Jackson was out and they went on this big run. I mean, I think Desmond Bain even has more upside than what we've seen so far, right, from Desmond. And that's despite the fact that he came into the league as a senior that was drafted, right? And a guy with like short arms and doesn't have all of the traditional, athleticism and, length and things that we look for in terms of upside. But he's just fucking awesome at basketball. Like, that's what it comes down to. He averaged 18 points a game last year, shot 44% from three on 7 3-point attempts per game. And then you look at the back part of the season where he was just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you look at his final 28 games, it looks like here. He averaged 19 to 20 points. He shot 45% from the field, 47% from three, 92% from the line, and averaged 5 rebounds and 3 assists while playing pretty stout defense. Guys like that are just so hard to find. They're just so valuable because he can scale up toward being a secondary ball handler who can create plays, or scale down to being like one of the most effective role players and like number 3, number 4 options in the league. So, I couldn't be more excited about where Desmond Bain's going. Ja Morant's just an absolute superstar, and I don't know like how to even talk about him without just saying this guy is an absolutely incredible, unbelievable basketball player.
Well, and those two guys fit together so well. Like when I think of Desmond Bain, I think of John Locke from the TV show Lost, right? Like, don't tell me what I can't do. He's just, it doesn't matter how short his arms are. Doesn't matter what his typical profile has been coming into the league. He's just a good basketball player. And to me, what the Grizzlies' common links have in a lot of these guys are high IQ, high feel guys who don't necessarily have a chip on their shoulder, but somebody might see them as either damaged goods or not necessarily the belle of the ball. And to Memphis, it's feel, it's just the ability to make plays happen on both ends of the floor. And they know how to make that fit within their system. I was a huge fan of Zire Williams, and I think that he's somebody that's primed to potentially take that leap from year 1 to year 2. Maybe not to the same degree that a Desmond Bain did last year, but Zaire, the circumstances around his time at Stanford, playing through that COVID year, not having regular access to a weight room as a really skinny freshman playing in the Pac-12, it's certainly going to impact his play. I thought he had a really, really good rookie season and is going to be primed for a good leap, for his second year here in the league. So those three of Morant, Williams, and Bain give Memphis so much flexibility and different guys in their backcourt to really play with.
Yeah, and the Zaire thing is interesting. So I did that big write-up on the Patrick Beverley, Talen Horton-Tucker deal. And within that, I noted that Talen Horton-Tucker is still 21 years old. And I don't know, did you read that story that I did?
No.
Okay, good, because this gives us a good thing. Do you know how many players in the final 8 teams, so the conference semifinals in both conferences, do you know how many players were 21 or younger and in the rotation for their team that were in the final 8 teams last year?
Off the top of my head, I'd throw a guess out there and say 2, but I don't think I could even name them.
It is 2.
Okay.
It's Tyrese Maxey, who's phenomenal and great, and we talked about him a little bit last week, and Zire Williams is the other one. And Zaire Williams, the fact that he was able to enter the rotation last year, I think is a pretty big surprise to a lot of people around the league. Certainly, I think that a lot of people thought he would be a project, and instead he was able to come in and just be an effective energy defender that could put the ball on the ground a little bit and at least keep the offense moving and occasionally knock down a shot. I think that his growth process this year is going to be fascinating. And then you look at just some of the other guys on this roster. I mean, Xavier Tillman is an effective, useful player. Brandon Clark is a guy that stepped up in a big way when Jaren Jackson was out last year and has really impactful, efficient offensive play and switchable defensive abilities. He's not quite the defender that he was at Gonzaga, in my opinion, in the NBA, but he is an effective, if not starter, then, 6th or 7th man that is valuable in today's NBA and could turn into a starter. I think if he continues to develop as a shooter a little bit and continues to develop that defensive ability to become what we saw at Gonzaga, as opposed to like being just like a solid defender, which is what he is in the NBA at this point. This is where I think it's worth kind of talking about their draft this past year, because I think it was everything that encapsulates them in a weird way. And also a draft that I understood because it fits that synergistic model that you talked about, but also is one that I didn't personally love because I didn't have great grades on some of the players that they took. But because they went to the Memphis Grizzlies, and I know that they will have a plan for how to develop these specific players, I like it a little bit more than if like the Hornets would have drafted these guys, right? So they draft Jake LaRavia, who I was very high on throughout the year. And, you know, I think that I like drove the bus for him to essentially be someone that was in the public sphere in terms of the draft last year. And I love LaRavia. I think he's an interesting player. I think he's going to be really valuable for the Grizzlies. I don't really care about what he did at Summer League because he's just not like a Summer League player. You know what I mean? Yeah. Then they draft David Roddy. They essentially trade DeAnthony Melton for David Roddy, which is not something that I loved, but David Roddy is a very effective, you know, college basketball player that really shoots it well, thinks the game well. And he's a marginal inefficiency. I think that's what Memphis does. They find these guys that are marginal inefficiencies. Desmond Bain with short arms, Xavier Tillman without great athleticism, Brandon Clark with short arms, right? Guys that are just really good at basketball and are competitive and are unselfish human beings that are willing to put in work and are willing to improve and are on upward growth trajectories because they continue to improve. And I think David Roddy is in many ways the epitome of that, even though I just am so skeptical that he's going to have a chance to defend at the NBA level. And then they take Kennedy Chandler, a guy that was too short, right? And goes in the second round despite being the SEC tournament MVP. And they take Vince Williams, who is a guy that, you know, when I talked to teams that had him in for workouts, they were like, this guy just doesn't have any game. Like that's kind of what they said. They were just like, doesn't really dribble well. He wasn't really great in like the 3-on-3 setting, but he was really effective at VCU last year. And his tape was awesome. I thought like he is a guy who has learned how to shoot. He has long arms. I worry a little bit about him in terms of foot speed defensively, but you take a guy in the second round, he's a perfect flyer for that. And then like the epitome of all of this is taking Kenny Lofton and signing him immediately after the draft as a guy that has just always been good at basketball, but hasn't really, doesn't look like an NBA player, right? Like doesn't have that traditional frame. And, you know, even if he can come in and just like kill skinny centers like he did in Summer League when he played against Chet, like that's worth a back end of the roster spot, right? Again, I'm skeptical defensively on him, but you know, it's just everything that they're about. They take these marginal inefficiency guys that don't necessarily look like NBA players a lot of the time, but you know what? They're just fucking good at basketball and they're just like, let's go for it. Right.
Yeah. Well, and to bring this back full circle, like the bow that you can tie on the knot for them is that they've got one guy on each end of the floor that can make all the pieces work no matter what. Ja Morant can create offense regardless of the type of lineups that you've tried out there. He can work in transition. He can work in the half court. He can set up shooters for success. He's great with role guys and bigs. And then on the other end, Jaren Jackson Jr., that versatile linchpin piece who can protect the rim, switch out onto the perimeter on defense, play some minutes at the 5, play the 4 when, you know, most of the time. Like that versatility that those two star players bring to the table really sets them up to play so many different types of lineups and type of players where you can explore the margins and find those inefficiencies and just good basketball players.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I am excited to see where the Grizzlies go. The last guy here that I will bring up is Santi Aldama.
Yeah.
I know that Memphis still really likes him and thought he was terrific in the G League last year. And this is a guy that is, you know, played college basketball in your neck of the woods at Loyola. Yep. And was a statistical marvel. I think I had him at like 31 or 32 and was higher than anyone in the public facing sphere on him pre-draft. and Memphis takes them, I think, at 30.
30. Yep. Last pick of the first round. Yep.
Last pick of the first round. And he was incredibly efficient and effective in the G League last year. And I think that that could end up working out for them as well. Like they take, I just love I love them. They draft how I would draft is the thing. Like not all the time, but like their overarching strategy is how I would draft. I would probably take a different player than David Roddy. Like I probably would have taken Ty Washington. Right. But like their overarching strategy is synergistic. It makes sense. And it is, I think, more coherent than what other teams, not every other team, but like there are other teams that are good at the draft, but like than what most other teams bring to the table.
Yeah. And Santi looks great too. I do have the good fortune of having him. He came and worked out in our gym once this summer. Really shot looks great. So I think that it's right on to say that there are high hopes for him and another just unique multi-positional toolsy high field piece that fits right into everything we're talking about here with Memphis.